This is the TriDot podcast. TriDot uses your training data and genetic profile combined with predictive analytics and artificial intelligence to optimize your training, giving you better results in less time with fewer injuries. Our podcast is here to educate, inspire, and entertain. We'll talk all things triathlon with expert coaches and special guests. Join the conversation and let's improve together.
Welcome to the TriDot podcast, everyone. Okay, guys, so usually we try our best on the show to not say anything that dates when we recorded or when an episode comes out. Whether you listen to an episode the day it comes out, a month later, or a year later, the triathlon wisdom shared is still relevant. And so we want the jokes, the stories, the anecdotes to still be relevant as well. We don't want to be the show who says, hey, Ironman Hawaii just happened. What are your thoughts? Because we want you to just, whenever you listen, what you hear is relevant to you. But I'm going to give away when this one was recorded just a little bit. At the time of this recording, the triathlon world is feeling the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And our topic today is how to optimize your training when there is no race in sight. We all have plenty of motivation and plenty of reason to follow the training plan as we approach race day. But when we are in between races or a long way away from our main A race, or maybe you're in the winter break without a race until the following year, or maybe you're quarantined inside because there's a pandemic. What should our mindset be as athletes during these times? And what should we expect from our training plan? This is a topic we were already planning on addressing, but with most triathletes worldwide pushing their races further into the future due to COVID-19, we decided to push this conversation to the front of the line. The questions I ask will be 1,000% relevant for day-to-day triathletes once the world is a healthier place, but we hope it's also helpful for what we are facing today with race postponements and cancellations. I've got three of our wonderful podcast regulars on today to talk about this. First up is Coach John Mayfield. He is a successful Ironman athlete himself. He also leads TriDot's Athlete Services, ambassador and coaching programs. He has coached hundreds of athletes ranging from first-timers to Kona qualifiers and professional triathletes. John has been using TriDot since 2010 and coaching with TriDot since 2012. John, how's it going today?
Going good. Since you kind of let the cat out of the bag on the date, I can also speak to the fact that we just closed out our 2020 ambassador roster.
Yeah.
And very proud to say that we have over 500 ambassadors representing TriDot from across the U.S. and across the world. So
and we love them all. We love them
all. We really do. These guys are just fantastic ambassadors. They represent our brand and our culture and our ambition to just share knowledge and experience and provide a better triathlon experience for everyone. And that's what these guys are about. So shout out to all our 500 2020 ambassadors.
Yeah, it's really become this really cool family of athletes that we have, right? That are on course, cheering for each other, representing the brand, and maybe representing their own tri club as well. You know, a lot of our athletes wear their tri club's kit and then a TriDot hat or visor on race day and represent on all fronts. I will say this again, acknowledging when we're recording this. One of our newer ambassadors, who actually just won a TrainX Challenge winner, his name is Matt Rudd. He has been posting daily to the TriDot Ambassadors Facebook group and on his Instagram. He's calling it his quarantine diary. And literally every day he's kind of posting just situationally, just the little nuggets of what he's going through as a triathlete training during a quarantine. He's one of our Canadian athletes up in Canada. And so to me, when he first started doing it, day 1, 2, 3, I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. But there's no way he keeps going with it. Well, now he's on like day 7, 8, 9, and he's still doing a daily post with his quarantine diary and finding ways to make it fresh and funny and entertaining. So go check out Matthew J. Rudd on Instagram and see his quarantine diary. And I bring that up to say this. I feel like there's several podcasts we've recorded during this COVID-19 kind of quarantine time. Some of them about COVID-19 and some not. But I feel like these episodes we're recording together during this outbreak, in a way, are our own quarantine diaries as a podcast. And this episode is one of those. So anyway, shout out to Matt Rudd. You're hilarious. You have a baller mustache, and keep up the good work. You're an ambassador we're going to shout out today, but we're to John's point, super thankful for all 500 plus of our people willing to be part of the family. So, all right, moving along. Next up is pro triathlete and coach Elizabeth James. Elizabeth came to the sport from a soccer background and quickly rose through the triathlon ranks using TriDot. From a beginner to top age grouper to a professional triathlete. She's a Kona and Boston Marathon qualifier who has coached triathletes with TriDot since 2014. Elizabeth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so pumped for today's episode. So let's get rolling. Let's do this.
Next up is TriDot founder and CEO Jeff Booher. Jeff is the chief architect behind TriDot's insight optimization technology that powers TriDot's optimized training. He's a multiple Ironman finisher who has coached dozens of professional triathletes and national champions, as well as hundreds of age groupers to podiums and PRs since he began coaching triathlon in 2003. Jeff, how's it going?
Oh, pretty good. How are you doing?
Doing good, friend. Doing good. Ready to rock this podcast quarantine diary here. Well, who am I? I'm Andrew, the average triathlete, voice of the people, and the captain of the middle of the pack. We'll get going with today's warm-up question and then get into the main set conversation discussing how to train when there's no race in sight. For a cool down, we're going to give a shout out to some of the great companies in the triathlon market that are doing just some really cool things to help the world during this COVID-19 outbreak. It's going to be a great show. Let's get to it.
Time to warm up. Let's get moving.
Across the entire world of sports, athletes rely on motivational mantras to inwardly focus themselves on game day. American football players write scriptures on their eye black. International football stars and soccer players wear undershirts with meaningful phrases. And basketball players write on their shoes dedicating games to loved ones. There are tons of examples, and I am sure if I ask the right triathlete, some of us out there have a race day mantra that ends up on our body somewhere in some way. For today's warm-up question, if you were to take a race day mantra onto the course with you, what would it say? I want to hear from Elizabeth on this one first. Elizabeth, if you put something, just a nice little encouraging reminder to yourself somewhere on your body on race day, what would it say?
Well, I've actually only had it written on my body twice for actual racing, but my mantra is I am stronger. And I leave it open-ended like that, not saying what I'm stronger than, as that part kind of gets filled in during the event as I'm racing. And it's not a competitive thing like with other athletes. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm, stronger than so-and-so or stronger than this athlete. It's always an internal reminder for me. So things like, if I'm doubting myself, like I'm stronger than the self-doubt, or I'm stronger today than I've ever been. I'm stronger than this hill. In the last couple of races, it's been, I'm stronger than this freezing cold or choppy water. When I see my husband or my family on the course cheering me on, I think to myself, I'm stronger because of the people that are here supporting me. So I am stronger is kind of the base of my mantra for racing. And then I add to that kind of depending on the circumstances that I'm currently facing.
Yeah, I like that because it's no matter what happens on the day, it's a nice little reminder that you're stronger than it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Very, very good. Jeff Booher.
Well, Andrew, I gave this a lot of thought. I've never written anything on my body for a race, but I think it may change. Race to race, what people put on, they're very personal things, the time that they're going through. And the one that I kept resonating on, like you mentioned, just a scripture, and it's Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. And when I got to be thinking more about that, and I mean, for some Christians, you've heard that verse a million times. For others, they're not a Christian. There's still a lot of truth you can take from that. And you may have a curiosity, what is that, 4:13 on Tim Tebow's cheek? Or, what does that mean? And a lot of people, to me, it's more significant even outside of the sport. And I use it in sport because that just kind of epitomizes the struggles that we go through in life. But a lot of people view that verse as like your Christian spinach. Like, Papa, you eat your spinach, you can do anything.
No matter what you're doing, you can do it all.
I'm doing it for Christ, and so I can do anything. And it's not about, the verses that come before that. It's not about our goals necessarily. But Paul before that, he says, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances I'm in. I've learned what it's to be in need, what it's to have plenty. I know what the secret of being content with every situation, any and every situation I'm in, whether I'm fed or hungry or living with plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And so to that, I see it's living in pain, without pain, when you're doing good, when you're doing bad, and it's about the purpose. And so I like to focus on the purpose and know that there's purpose behind the pain. You wouldn't do pain voluntarily, but whenever you do see you're in pain, and it's in a race or any time, focus on the purpose. And if you don't know the purpose, then trust in the God and that there is a purpose there. And someday you may or may not know that purpose, but there is a purpose. So, pain without purpose is pointless. So I think in life, if you focus on pursuing your purpose and not just avoiding the pain, but realizing the pain has a purpose in itself to get you closer to your purpose that he has for you.
Yeah, and in that way, it's Philippians 4:13, not just being representative of that one isolated verse, what it's talking about, but it's giving
not
you
a
the
selective
context.
application.
Yeah, it's giving you the context of the verses that precede it, and it just gives it a whole deeper meaning than what people probably would think of when they see that on Tim Tebow's, face or any football player's face during a game. So yeah, love that perspective, that deeper look of looking in the full context of the scripture, what's being said there. Yeah, that's great. John Mayfield, what would you want to remind yourself of while you're out on course?
So, like a lot of folks, I've got the Iron Man tattoo, and my Iron Man tattoo says Soli Deo Gloria, which is Latin for God's glory. But as far as mantras, I really have two that kind of come, and I would say they're probably more so specific to training than racing, but they're also applicable in racing. And one is it's kind of just a check, and one it's a strength building thing, and it's I've not yet begun to suffer. And so often it comes up when I feel like I'm starting to suffer, or like when it's like, man, this interval is really starting to suck, and I really want to quit. That's when it comes in, and it's I've not yet begun to suffer.
It's kind of like the Sebastian Kienle, the pro, like his phrase is, if it's hurting me, it's killing them.
Right.
Right. It's kind of along those lines.
That's kind of that thing. It's like, with everyone else out there on race day, it's, we're out here together, and we're getting close, but I've not yet begun to suffer. So that's when we can go in. And kind of along those same lines, one that I was told years ago, I've mentioned before, Ronnie Reeves, who was one of my early mentors in triathlon. It's Cindy's husband that everybody knows. We were probably in his garage on a trainer set, and again, things were getting tough towards the end. He said, "You can do anything for 3 minutes." And I cannot tell you how many times I have repeated that to myself in the decade since Ronnie told me that for the first time.
And his athletes. I didn't know where that came from until now.
Yeah. And,
Elizabeth, how many times have you heard that from John?
More than once.
and it's true. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've told that to myself and been able to get through it. And even if I've got 5 minutes to go, I know if I can just make it to that 3 minute mark, I don't have to make it all the way to the end. I just have to make it to the 3 minute mark, because I know I've proven to myself literally hundreds of times I can do anything for 3 minutes. And it might suck, and I'm really glad when the 3 minutes are up, but I can do it. So that one's probably because it's time based, but it's the same thing applies to a mile. I know I can run a mile. I've run lots of 1 mile. So as you approach that last mile, I can run 1 mile.
Yeah, no, I love that. It reminds me of one of my training buddies named Kelly, who I know listens to the podcast, and he's multiple time Ironman finisher. And so I always, he's a great sounding board for me, just as a training buddy on asking him questions about approaching race day. And but he's that guy that when we're on a group ride, he's always kind of throwing out those little one-liners like that when we hit a hard hill, or when we're turn the corner into a headwind. He's always good for the good one-liner that just kind of gets you through that moment. And so shout out to him, and shout out to all the training partners out there who kind of have those words of wisdom, those little Yoda nuggets, right, that help us through those training sessions. But I love that one. I can do anything for 3 minutes. That's a super cool mindset. So
Yoda nugget.
Yoda nugget.
How would Yoda say that? I was trying to think. I don't even know how Yoda would say that. 3 minutes you can do? I don't know. Like
that was a good try. That's better than I would have come up with.
3 minutes you can do.
This is digressing quickly. That was TriDot founder Jeff Booher giving his best Yoda impression.
Awesome.
That was awesome, right? Oh man, I don't even know how I follow that, but just really quickly for me, when I was thinking about this, I've tried to think just as an athlete, in the past, and as a Christian, Jeff, I love that you shared Philippians 4:13. I've never had one scripture that I felt is like the perfect application for me, on my body during the race course. I love it when athletes go that route. When you see it on football players, it's great to see some faith-based players out there. But for me, I think the one phrase I always come back to, and it's kind of a self-reminder for me before heading into a race, I always remind myself, okay, there's 3 parts of this race. I'm really going to focus on swimming smooth. I want to focus on biking steady. And then when I get to the run, I just want to run brave. And for me, that's it kind of comes from the people that I see that are successful swimmers. They're not expending energy, slapping at the water. There's a smoothness to it, right? When you're doing the swim portion right. And once you get on the bike, okay, it's not about being a hero. It's not about throwing down the fastest split, on the day necessarily. It's not about passing people and being a hero, but it's more about settling into your rhythm, staying steady, knowing what your power numbers, heart rate numbers should be, and sticking to it. And then once you get on the run course, that's the part where you just leave it all out to dry, right? Everything you got left, just run brave, run with all you got left, and get to that finish line. And so that's always just internally for me. I've never said that. I've never voiced that to anybody. I've never written it on myself. But it's just been an inward reminder that when that adrenaline gets pumping and you try to do too much, or you try to really peak on that day and go overboard, that's always grounded me on race day. Really cool to hear y'all's input. Guys, we're going to throw this question out on social media. Do you have something you write on your calf, write on your thigh, write on your hand, write on your hat, sunglasses, shoes to kind of as a mantra that just propels you forward and helps you through the day? We want to know what it is, because we know there's a lot of great ones out there. A lot of great ones that our athletes can read and hear and learn from and apply to the race day themselves. So go find us, TriDot Triathlon Training on social media, and we will have this question out there, and we want to hear your responses to what is your race day mantra.
On to the main set. Going in 3, 2, 1.
Our main set today is brought to you by our friends at Garmin. In the fitness and multi-sport market, Garmin products are the gold standard, known for their compelling design, superior quality, and best value. As a triathlete, Garmin can be and should be your very best friend. They offer best-in-class GPS watches that can track your every swim, bike, and run with ease. When you are out on the bike, Garmin's Vector power pedals can measure those all-important watts, while their Edge cycling computers conveniently display all your data in real time as you ride. You can also bring Garmin into your pain cave with their Tacx indoor trainers and accessories. I tell everyone who will listen that my Tacx Flux indoor smart trainer is the best investment I have made in my own triathlon training. The best part is Garmin is fully integrated with TriDot, so your Garmin Connect and Garmin Health data seamlessly streams to TriDot, and your training is continually optimized. So head to Garmin.com and check out all the cool tech they have to offer. Way back in the history of mankind, someone decided to take the 365 days of the year and break them down into 12 months. Those 365 days were a blank slate. They could have been arranged in an infinite number of ways. But here we are with 12 months that take us through the year. For a coach designing training, there are a huge number of ways to break down an athlete's season to help gain fitness and peak for race day. At the highest level, there are really 2 different times during the season, though. The times you are prepping for a race that is quickly approaching, and the times you are training without a race in sight. Today, we're going to be talking about how to approach our training during those times of the year when we are not actively preparing for an upcoming race. So guys, let's start here. How do you optimize training when there's no race on the schedule yet?
So actually, the 365 days weren't broken into 12 months. It was originally broken into 10 months. That's
Really?
why September, Oct is 8, 9, November, Nano 10, Deca. But then Julius and Augustus Caesar both had to have their months. And so they added July and August and then took days away from all the rest of the months. So that's how we end up with 12.
I 1,000%, when I scripted that intro, I 1,000% expected somebody from the audience to email in and to kind of give me that history. I didn't even bother to look it up because I'm like, you know what? Someone's going to educate me after I say all this on why it was broken up the way it was.
It's pretty cool. This is pretty cool. If you look back, the Gregorian calendar, the first day of the year was actually March 1st, and they backed it up to January 1st and did some changes there. So if you look for George Washington, and that happened in the early 1700s. So if you look up George Washington's birthday, he has 2 different years of his birth because it straddles. It's in that January. So it was in 1 year, and then they moved it from March back to January, and so it became the next year. So
Anyway,
on the same episode, we're getting a free history lesson from Jeff Booher, and we're getting free Yoda impressions from Jeff Booher on the same podcast episode. This is already landmark stuff. But
so, how do you optimize your training schedule when there's no race in sight? This kind of gets started as we dig in deeper to the considerations of what you can do. There's I almost call it a pre-optimization factor, and this is going back almost 15 years now when I first started, even before TriDot existed, thinking about how do we break up the season, how do we start categorizing times of year and what's driving training. Of course, you have the athlete's ability and metrics on their profile and their abilities and all like that.
And of course, you can just train, but how do you optimize that time?
Right.
What's the best use of that time?
Correct. And so it becomes of how do you improve overall fitness in what areas? How do you prioritize those things and make the best use of your time to be most efficient with your time? And so I realized very quickly that there was two realities, and those ended up being two phase types later. And the one reality was you're training in a time period of the year when the requirements of the race course dictate how, or have a primary influence on how your training needs to be. If you need to do an Ironman or half Ironman, you need to run 13.1 miles or 56-mile bike. That length of the race that is 2 weeks from now is going to have a driving factor on your training.
You got to be ready to complete that distance.
Exactly. But a year before that, 2 years before that, that length of that course doesn't matter yet. Whatever it is. So you're free to do a lot of stuff 2 years out, 1 year out, 6 months out, that as you get closer, you're not free to do anymore. So without that constraint, how would you train? And then with those constraints, how would you train? So that was the very first decision from a time prioritization and optimization standpoint that you take. So it's like a pre-optimization, two phase types. Race prep is what we call race prep, is when your race is imminent and it gets closer. There's not a dead cutoff for swim, bike, and run at a certain date, and there is overlap. So it's a soft transition from the end of one phase to the beginning of the next. So, but there is, if you in periodized training, you are going to block it off and have structure within each phase of mesocycles. But it is that the development phase is when the requirements of the race distance don't have as much influence or impact or restriction on what you can do. So it's a more freer time. And then as you get closer to the race, that's a race prep phase. And that is where one of the primary drivers of your decision-making and optimization are the requirements of the race.
So when do these kind of race phases happen?
So the time when there's no race in sight, it can happen a few different times. One is after the last race of one season. So you're finished a race, you may take a week or two off, just so we're not counting that time. Just I need to chill, don't want to burn out, spend some time with family, go on a vacation, whatever, holidays. So it's not counting that time, but after that's back. You're ready to train. You have time to train. You want to focus. You may not know what races are coming up. So that's one time. Another time is when you may have some indecision. So you're getting close to the season. It's going to start, but you have some family vacations you're not sure about. You might take a new job. All of these different things are still in flux. It's preseason. Maybe it's just what race, but you're just 9 months out from it. So there's a long time, and so you don't need to start going long yet. And so you have that preseason. And then there's the other time, and that's when you're going through a global pandemic and everything's on hold and you don't know when races are going to be scheduled, and so you're dealing with this weird reality when normally you may be right in the middle of some ramping up.
And for a lot of athletes, they were smack dab in the middle of that. I mean, when I got my email saying Ironman Texas was going to be postponed, the next day I was supposed to have a 4-hour 45-minute trainer ride. And so it's okay, if I'm not racing now in a month, I don't need to do a 4-hour 45-minute trainer ride. So what do I do?
Or maybe you do.
Or maybe I do. How do I know? What do I do? Okay, so let's kind of talk about this phase that we're talking about. When your race isn't imminent, you don't have something, right now that you're preparing for. We like you said, Jeff, we call that the development phase. So what is the development phase? And as athletes, what are we looking to achieve during these training times?
The main focus in the development phase is going to be increasing an athlete's functional threshold in all disciplines. So an athlete is looking to gain speed and strength in the swim, bike, and run so that they can enter that race preparation phase as strong as possible before needing to increase their stamina for that specific race distance.
So one of the things we talk about fairly often is one of our kind of core mantras within TriDot is fast before far and strong before long. So that's speaking to building this functional threshold prior to building that stamina. So we want to get fast before we take on these longer races, knowing that it's that functional threshold that's going to power us through those long races. So when we talk about that, this is really what we're talking about. And this is how that's achieved. This is how we get fast before far and strong before long, because it's the difference of training specifically for functional threshold as opposed to training for stamina. We talk about this at length in episode 10. That's that escaping the power stamina paradox. That's one we've referenced back a ton.
It's like one of our brainier, headier training theory episodes, but so core to how to optimize
There's
training.
a ton of truth in it, and,
Yeah.
and some of it's not necessarily intuitive, but once explained, it really makes sense. And some of it even flies in the face of what is a long-held even misconception within training and coaching and triathlon in general. So it's a very important topic, and it's something that really can revolutionize an athlete's training and their approach, as well as their race results.
Yep, it's definitely a 5 light bulb episode.
Yeah.
So a lot of things, these things make sense when you get that concept and understand what's going on. And you think about, what Elizabeth was saying, we need to focusing on the functional threshold. And it's because maintaining that high volume, the stamina, the things that you have to do when you get closer to a race, that comes at a cost. You only have so much time, energy, and ability to absorb training stress. And when it's driven by the race distance as you get closer, there's things that you can't do because of that. And so this development phase is far enough out where you're free to do that. You can focus on your FTP. You can focus on form. You don't have to worry so much about how long you're swimming. Make sure every form stroke is perfect and really work on things. Go back to add strength training, have more time for that, a lot of injury prevention. I know in our training the drills that you do during that time are more focused on where you are developmentally as a swimmer with your stroke. And as you get closer to a race, the drills you start doing are more race specific. And so you may spend less time in those early fundamental races that you need to habituate the new movement over a long period of time. And if we have a long period of time, you're going to spend more and build that foundation during a developmental phase. Whereas if a race is coming up, you may go through that faster just because the race is imminent.
Got it. So when an athlete is not in this development phase, it's because they are approaching a race, and thus they're in the race prep phase. What are the most noticeable differences athletes will see in their swim, bike, and run training in between these two phases?
So I know we've already touched on this a little bit, but I mean, truly, in the development phase, athletes are going to notice sessions that specifically focus on those upper intensity zones to develop that functional threshold. So there's going to be some intense interval work with the specific purpose of creating those physiological adaptations that are going to make an athlete stronger and faster. Another thing that Jeff just touched on, and I know we've touched on in other episodes, is an athlete's training stress and their training stress profile. So an athlete has a very finite and specific amount of training stress that they can absorb within any given session, a week, and a mesocycle. And without having those longer duration workouts that are focused on increasing stamina and are essentially taking away some of that available stress that can be absorbed in training, the intensity can be higher in some shorter duration sessions as they're working to increase that functional
And that's what
threshold.
helps us build that power, that speed, get faster and stronger.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's even more significant in as you age, as you get older. Older athletes, as they're getting closer to races, they can't do a lot of high muscular endurance, and some of those things. Neurological stress is very taxing the older you get. Whereas in development phases, they can do that, and they can maintain that power longer in life, longer into their triathlon career.
Oh, wow.
Whereas younger people can do it longer into their race prep phases.
Yep. And when an athlete enters that race preparation phase, their training stress profile doesn't change. They can still only absorb a particular amount of training stress within that mesocycle of their training. So I would say that, the biggest differences that an athlete would see in kind of the movement between these training phases is if they're going from a development phase into like an Ironman race preparation phase. So in general, sprint and Olympic distance racing is done at or near an athlete's functional threshold, and the stamina required for those distances is either largely or entirely covered by the volume that they're already completing in that development phase. So a sprint and Olympic race preparation phase may look very similar to the development phase. But now, on the other side of that, in an Ironman or a 70.3 race preparation phase, the structure of that training cycle has to shift the focus from developing that functional threshold to now increasing the stamina necessary for that race distance. So during that race preparation phase, athletes are going to notice an increase in the duration of their training sessions, particularly kind of those long bike and those long run sessions.
So one thing I refer to as stamina is it's somewhat of a necessary evil, and obviously nothing wrong with stamina, but it comes at a cost. And building functional threshold and building stamina are somewhat mutually exclusive. It's difficult to do them both at the same time for some of those reasons that Elizabeth mentioned and Jeff mentioned as well. So one thing that's unique about these development phases is that we don't have to build stamina, so we can focus exclusively on building that functional threshold. And when we say functional threshold, we're really speaking to swim, bike, and run. It's power, it's speed, it's how powerful can we build the engine? How fast can we create the athlete? Because that speed and that power that is obtained in these development phases is going to have a direct impact throughout the race season. Whether you're continuing to race short course, which, as Elizabeth mentioned, is a functional threshold event, or whether you're on the opposite end of the spectrum racing Ironman, which is much more of a stamina event, it's still that functional threshold that's going to determine how fast and how powerful you're able to complete those events. So I refer to stamina as being cheap, and functional threshold is expensive. And so I think that can help contextualize how we approach them. So stamina is cheap because you build it real quick. And an athlete that's in a reasonably good condition can go from very low volume to Ironman ready in 8, 10, 12 weeks if they had to on the short end. So you build this stamina very quickly. But at the same time, it also dissipates very quickly. So if you go from your Ironman race where you're able to race for 10, 12, 14 hours, and you don't do any training for a month, a lot of that stamina is going to erode. It erodes very quickly, and it comes at a high cost to maintain. Functional threshold, however, is much slower to build. It takes much more time to increase the power of that engine. But again, as we mentioned, this is what's going to really determine your race success. If you're gauging your race success based on time, functional threshold is your key component. That's what's going to determine your race results. But as I mentioned, it takes time to develop. It takes a lot of time to drop 10 seconds off your 100 pace, especially the stronger you are as a swimmer. To drop 5 seconds off your 100 pace may take months or a year, depending on where you are. Same thing with your functional threshold power. To gain 10 watts may take a significant amount of time, or to drop 10, 20 seconds off your 5K time. Those are all functional threshold events. Your 100 pace, your 20-minute power, your 5K time, those are all functional threshold events. So I think people understand that yeah, to a certain extent, early on, we make those gains real easy. We got to have that low-hanging fruit where we can drop a minute off the 5K time every month when we reassess. But at some point, when we build up to that critical mass, those gains become much more difficult. You have to invest a lot more time. You have to be much more intentional in making those gains. You can't just go out and go on random runs or random bike rides and see these gains at some point. So it's
because
very
they're
expensive.
Yeah.
It's very time consuming. It's something you actually have to really work on, really focus on, be very intentional in doing. But the good news is they stick around much longer. Yes, you still have to maintain your fitness. Yes, you still have to do the work, but you're going to be able to maintain those paces and those power numbers for a much longer period of time. So they're going to stick with you. So you can take these gains from one season to the next. Whereas as a rule, it's very, very difficult to maintain stamina from one season to another. So if you race a late season Ironman race, to maintain that stamina into the following season, where there may be a 4, 5, 6 month
it's
break,
gone. Yeah, it's
the work required to do that is going to be very taxing. You're going to have a very high injury predisposition or really high injury risk if
you're not going to get faster.
do the work. And that's the big thing, is the cost. So in order to maintain that high amount of stamina, that means you're not going to be working on your functional threshold. So you're not getting any faster. In fact, you're neglecting your functional threshold, which means you're actually getting slower. So you're able to go longer, but you're going slower because you've chosen to maintain stamina, and in doing so, whether you realize it or not, you've neglected your functional threshold, and that in time is going to erode.
Yeah, no, that's. I mean, you're saying all of that, and I'm just thinking back to my own training, and because we did the episode, like you said, about the power stamina paradox. We've talked on the podcast before about when you really slip into training for stamina, it really inhibits your ability to train your functional threshold. And so I got to see that at work in my own training for the first time while I was getting ready for Ironman Texas, because, my run dot, swim dot, bike dot, every single month was just getting a little faster. Those 5K times, you're dropping 10, 20 seconds off every single time. And then once you got into that race prep phase where I was working on my stamina and the runs were going from an hour and a half to an hour and 45 to 2 hours to 2 hours 15, suddenly my 5K wasn't getting any faster. But every single long run I would take, if it was an hour and a half one week, and at the end of it, I was just like, oh man, that was really hard. And then I pull up the program, and next week was an hour 45. How am I going to run an hour 45? That hour and a half was really hard. And then I get to the hour 45 the next week, and at the hour and a half mark, I was fine. And by hour 45, I was tired. And so like each week as that bike ride went from 3.5 hours to 4:15. Well, that jump actually, like I was ready to make that jump after having done the 3.5 the week before. So I was very, not surprised, I guess pleasantly surprised that everything we talked about, I could see it at work. I could see that, man, this stamina is really coming along quite well, quickly.
It comes quick. And one thing just to kind of follow up is there's no limit on how much functional threshold you need. Unless you're winning every race by a massive margin, you don't have enough functional threshold. So that is something that you can always
still
continue.
get faster.
You always need more. Unless you're just a casual athlete that's not really concerned with time, sure. But I think for the most of us, if we're going to do the training, if we're going to race, we want to race faster, we want to improve our ranking. Functional threshold is that. So again, unless you're just obliterating the field in every single race, which there's not a single person in the world that's doing that at every given distance, that functional threshold can continue to increase. There is marginal benefit from having more functional threshold. At a certain point, and it would be specific for each athlete at each distance, there's not a marginal benefit to having more stamina. So in order to race a sprint race, you don't need Ironman stamina. Once you have sufficient stamina to complete the sprint race or the Olympic race, you don't need the stamina to go for 8, 10, 12 hours. Obviously, if you're racing 70.3 or Ironman, you do, but even still, there's a limit on how much stamina that you need. You only need enough stamina to successfully and complete well 140.6 miles to race Ironman. There's no need for additional stamina to do work beyond that. So again, create the stamina that you have to when you have to. Spend the rest of the time building the engine.
There's another couple things I'd add. One is like a hidden limiter there, and then another hidden benefit to focusing, just like we've been talking. Hidden limiter is the ego. A lot of times people want to post about and talk about how long they went. And so there's this, I just got back from my 2.5 hour run.
Oh, and you see that on the Ironman Facebook groups, because you're 4 months out from an Ironman, and people are like, here's my training today. How was yours? And it's like, why are you biking 150 miles and then running?
But there is some ego, some pride, some whatever, and that comes at a cost. The hidden benefit is we talked about just general injury, not overtraining, but from an efficiency standpoint, when you're running, especially running and swimming too, the longer you do that, the longer your runs are, the more % of that time you are using poor form. So if you're running, great runners can hold really good form for 45 minutes, something like that. So if you're running these long ones, especially for most of age groupers, When you're running long, you're spending maybe 15, 20 minutes with pretty good form, and then it deteriorates. So you're spending more time every week running and habituating bad form. So not only is your threshold fitness coming down or not going up, but your efficiency is deteriorating, your form is deteriorating, and the more you do that, the harder it is to fix later. And so focusing on your threshold, reducing those long runs enables you to develop more power, but also more % of your strokes, steps, strides, pedals are with better form. And so you're habituating and improving your efficiency at the same time. So there's this double whammy of power goes up and efficiency also goes up.
Yeah, which really reinforces John's point that stamina is kind of the necessary evil, because it's necessary because you have to have the stamina to finish the day. But, you know, it's evil in the sense that you are breaking down your body, you are breaking down your form, you are kind of losing a little bit of your threshold over time. So let's kind of move into this. I know that we've kind of talked about how our race schedules are what primarily determine what phase type that we need to be in at any given time. Right? We either have a race coming up or we don't. So help me and our listeners kind of with some of the specifics here. When we add a race to the calendar, at what point does it impact what training phase we're in?
Well, it depends. And so that's relative to the race distance. It's relative to the athlete's ability. It's relative to the amount of increase. So you're taking how long does it take that athlete to finish that particular race distance? Then you're saying, well, how much can that athlete improve from week to week to week? That's based on body composition, how long they've been doing the sport, whether it's a run or a bike. You can increase more on the bike than you can on the run because there's no impact. Genetics comes into it. So there's this concept of we use increasable weeks. So how many weeks between now and race day are increasable? How many can you increase? So you're going to take off those rest weeks. You're going to take off if you have a B race in there. You have a little taper, recovery before and after, so that removes 2 weeks of increase. So now you need to start your increase sooner if you're back planning from your race day. So there's all of those factors that will impact what that is. So the thing is looking at that time between your race day and backing up to the current time. And it's not like I think I mentioned right up front, a hard line where this automatically happens on one day. From you don't start increasing on your first week of race prep phase. In TriDot, it's overlapping. You'll see if you add a race that the last 2 or 3 weeks of your development phase, the volumes of your run start going up, and maybe your bike stays the same because you have to increase more on the run than you do on the bike. You're able to absorb those increases on the bike, and you might start that ramp up at week 8, T-8, and on run it might be 12 weeks out. And so that might not be relative to a pure break from phase to phase, but it's really that the athlete's ability, the race distance, how many increasable weeks they have, and what is their increased tolerance by overall volume and long session between now and then.
Does it matter at all when in the season our A races are? Like will a spring Ironman or 70.3 have a different impact on our development phase than a fall Ironman or 70.3, or is it all just relative to where you are in the season?
It's relative. It's not really seasonal at all. It's just when is your race and what is now? How far is that from now? So if you're saying when should I start training? When should I get serious? When should I start optimizing my training? Sooner. Always.
Today.
Yes, because this prepares you. And that's another thing just about the name of the phases. So whether you're in a race prep or developmental, you're preparing for your race, whatever your race is. Even if your race is not identified, you're still preparing from your race. You're going to be in a better starting spot to start that race. And even if you're, not in a developmental phase, you're in a race prep phase. You're still developing. You're developing stamina. You're developing fitness form. All of those things, you're still doing both always. But it's just a classification that we use. So I think the thing that matters the most is the time, how much time is between now and that race. And there's a benefit to starting earlier because you're in essence shortening your race. And so you get this duplicated, amplified benefit, kind of like I mentioned before, when you increase your power and decrease the cost, your drag, your poor efficiency, you become more efficient and faster at the same time. There's this double whammy. The same thing that happens, the more time you spend in your development phase, you're shortening your race. So you're getting faster. You're shortening the distance that you have to go on your race day. Instead of doing a 6-hour bike, you're doing a 5:30 bike. Well, now it's not going to take you as much time to complete that race. So you don't have to ramp up as far. So now you can start your ramp up a whole week later, which means you get more time to develop power And with a shorter race, now on your power curve, if say your FTP, your functional threshold on the bike is 300, and you'd normally be doing, I don't know the math here, but 75% of your threshold. Well, with a shorter race now, you can do 78%. So you increase the long tent pole, the threshold, so you have a higher start number, but you also shorten the race, so now you can do even a higher percentage of that higher number.
Yeah.
And be more efficient and have more time to develop. So there's multiple, 3 or 4 things all being amplified, that concept of optimizing this time.
And so the concrete example of that, just to kind of give one to give people kind of a little picture of that, because that's such a key principle. The professional athlete who's going to finish an Ironman in 8 hours, if I'm understanding this clearly, they don't need to start working on their stamina as soon as an athlete who's going to finish that Ironman in 13 hours, because that athlete has to get themselves ready for a 13-hour long race. They're only getting themselves ready stamina-wise for an 8-hour race. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, the mileage is the same, but the time is significantally different.
Yeah.
And that's really what the body perceives is the time on the course, not necessarily the miles or the distance that's covered.
Yep. So they're going to go, an hour faster, hour and a half faster on the bike.
Yeah.
So, and when you go back to the increasable weeks and how you determine all of that other thing, they are young, they are fit, their body composition is great. They have probably a very consistent, their injury risk is much lower. So they're able to train more, increase more every week. And so all of these factors are amplified in what they're able to do. There's a short gap. They're able probably sustaining a little higher volume. And so there's less, their starting point is much higher. Their ending point is much lower. So there's less gap. And a lot of them, I train a number of pros who throughout the season, their long rides throughout the year were, 2 hours. And then on race day, it was 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so they were in the same developmental volume year round. And so they were constantly getting their FTP higher and higher and higher and higher without that cost.
So most triathletes obviously are not just content with knocking out one race a year. Most of us line up several. Some are our top, most important A races. Some are tune-ups for those A races. Some are for fun. Some are because they are local and right down the road. Long story short here, how can we know in between races what type of training phase we should be in?
Oh man, there's a lot of great things to address here. So first off, athletes do kind of need to consider what their personal goals are within the sport. So I know that John had mentioned earlier that, many athletes are looking to be as fast as possible and really kind of go for those personal bests in their upcoming races. And in this case, the athlete needs to carefully consider what their A race is going to be and how they are going to best prepare for that event. So adding in a bunch of other events prior to that race preparation phase for an athlete's A race could certainly hinder their ability to develop their functional threshold if they need to kind of exit out of that developmental phase into a race preparation time. Because if athletes are always preparing for a long race event and they're needing to focus on that stamina, then they're missing the opportunities that are within that developmental phase. So that, the race preparation phase we've already talked about, stamina is that necessary evil. It's super important. You need to develop that stamina in order to get to the finish line. But the most important work is taking place before you even begin that race preparation phase. Kind of as we've mentioned, once you enter that race preparation phase, your finishing time is already largely established.
Your best case scenario is already there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, there are small marginal gains still to be made, and that stamina is necessary. But at that point, you are really just working to hold a percentage of your functional threshold for the duration of that race event. You're not necessarily making those gains on that functional threshold anymore. Now, to address, the other part of the question there with, the number of races and those local events down the street, and knowing what training phase you're in, knowing what training phase you're in or what you should be in, it's not a guessing game. It's not necessarily going to be, X number of weeks or the same for each athlete either. TriDot Season Planner is one of my absolute favorite tools and something that I'll frequently reference when I'm working with athletes and we're planning for their goals and the races for the upcoming season. So the season planner really allows athletes and coaches too to assign priority to the events that an athlete is either registered for or they're considering for their upcoming season. And then you can see how those events are going to interact with one another and how that is going to really impact the training phases that an athlete will go through. So those A races should be assigned first. Then based off of those A races, we kind of determine what else is important to the athlete and how that fits in with those most important events. So within TriDot, you can designate an A, B, and C priority race. And placing that A race on your season planner is going to generate a race preparation phase. And then, to kind of address the athlete that wants to do the number of local events and, doing that local sprint race down the road might be very important to that athlete, even if they are in that Ironman race preparation phase. That local event might be something that they've supported since the race first began. They may want to include it, and they can include it. But maybe we're going to designate that as a C race so they can participate, still, support their local racing community, but not at the expense of, a development phase or potentially their race preparations.
So they can still do really well in those races. They might, if it's a local sprint, you might be 30 seconds to 3 minutes slower because you didn't taper for that race. But at the end of the day, if you have a more important race coming up, you're going to gain even more of that time back working on your threshold since you let that sprint remain a C race, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and, sprint races might fit very well within that athlete's developmental phase because we've already talked about, too, that, the sprint race is going to be basically at the athlete's threshold. And so as they're doing this threshold work, that might fit in very nicely. And the season planner is a great way to just kind of look at how all those things interact. And I probably made that sound a little bit more confusing than it actually is or needs to be, but
I was tracking with you.
Okay. I mean, the season planner, because it's such a fantastic tool, it walks athletes through that entire process. So the athlete isn't there left, trying to make decisions about what training phase they're in or, what phase optimization needs to look like. The training is going to be optimized and therefore appropriate for the athlete's events that are coming up. So, if an event isn't in the near future, if there isn't a race in sight, then you're in that developmental phase. If you're preparing for a race, then you're in that race preparation phase, and the season planner is going to designate all of that.
I know when I'm sometimes looking at, okay, I know in the fall, maybe this month or that month, I'll do a 70.3, and I start looking at, the different races that Ironman has on the calendar, for that time period. And, do I want to do this one? Do I want to do that one? So sometimes I'll just kind of go ahead and input those on the season planner just to kind of see, how does this fit with the rest of my schedule? How is this going to change, my training if I pick this race over that race? And to your point, it's a really great tool to kind of see how certain races being certain priorities are going to affect it. So, and I think with that though, a lot of athletes, they kind of have the mindset that they start preparing for their race. They start preparing for that Ironman. They start preparing for that 70.3 or whatever their main A race is. They think they start preparing for it when they're a few months out from that race day, a few weeks out from that race day, maybe. I have a buddy of mine that he really enjoys running. He does a triathlon maybe one a year, maybe one every other year. He likes the sport. It's an occasional hobby for him. And when I started training with TriDot, and he was really interested in it, he asked me one time, he was interested in doing 70.3 Indian Wells. And he was like, okay, Andrew, at what month do I need to sign up for TriDot to be ready to race 70.3 Indian Wells? And it's kind of this common misnomer we see where people think that, okay, I need to sign up onto a training plan, or I need to get that coach, or I need to start preparing for that race 3 months out, 2 months out, 4 months out. What is that time block? And that's what he was getting at. And it's like, no, you need to start preparing for that race right now, because you're going to be getting faster for that race if you start right now. Once you get to 3 months, 4 months out, to your point, you're just building the stamina. So I guess maybe, John, talk to me about people that have this misconception. How would you address that mindset of, I start preparing for that race at that time?
I think it is a mindset issue. I think oftentimes triathletes don't look at their they look much more at their racing than they look at their training, and they allow the races really to dictate what their training phases look like. And so they get kind of stuck in that pattern, is that I'm training for this race, then I'm training for that race. And if the race is not, say, 3 to 4 months out, then they don't really feel like they're training specifically for a race. And oftentimes what we'll see is they just kind of do random training. They're not really intentional in what they're doing. They're not specific in what they're doing. And we mentioned, it's fine to take a couple weeks here or there just to relax and enjoy the sport. But when we invest the time in training, we want that time to be productive, and we want that training to improve our results on race day. So, right, you are going to your training is going to be very focused several months out, especially when we're racing 70.3 and Ironman distance races, which a lot of our athletes are. So this is obviously where we have to be intentional in our planning here. There has to be, as Jeff mentioned, those incremental gains. We have to have sufficient time that we can make safe gains each week so we can build that stamina. I kind of dogged stamina earlier, called it a necessary evil, but it is absolutely critical to have that stamina on race day. So we have to prepare for that. So that's what happens is we see that, and the training changes often, especially for those long course races where the training doesn't look like it did previously. So that's kind of how we get caught up in that. But really, every race is the sum of our entire triathlon or even prior experience. It's the sum of all of our training. It's the sum of all of our knowledge and experience. It's every race is an opportunity to put together every session we've ever done, everything we've ever learned, every bit of experience we've ever gained. And that's kind of splitting hairs, but it really is an important distinction to make, in that we are, today, the training we do now is absolutely having a direct impact on our next race, and really, to a certain extent, every race from here on after.
So, John, back on episode 18 of the TriDot podcast, we talked about triathlon coaching in the era of artificial intelligence. And one of the things that came up on that show was, at what point in the season is it most beneficial for an athlete to have a coach? And John, you specifically said that you would actually rather work with an athlete further out from their race while they're in this development phase, working on their thresholds, as opposed to during the race prep phase, building the stamina closer to the race. Does that have to do with what we can accomplish during these different phases?
Yeah, and it's something that Elizabeth spoke to earlier, and I think we've mentioned it several times throughout, is that it's really the work done in these development phases that really produces the actual finishing time. And that's so often what an athlete is after. Most of our time, our goals are somewhat time-based, even just to finish. That's still a time-based goal, because you have to make those cutoffs. So we're gauging our success, our happiness, our enjoyment of the sport based on our time. Those times are going to be determined by the work that is done, as we mentioned, not necessarily in those last several weeks or months, but really in these development phases where we're able to build that engine. And as I just mentioned, so many athletes do it wrong. They misuse this time, or they don't realize the importance of the time. So that's why I would say that. I'm just a big advocate of having a coach year round. And so I would definitely not advocate for picking a 3 to 4 month period. You're going to get your best results from working with a coach through both development phases and race prep phases. But as I mentioned, so many athletes just do it wrong. So I would rather work with the athlete in that very critical development phase, and then kind of let them go on their own to do the race prep. But each phase, the development and the race prep, have unique opportunities and challenges that it's really beneficial to have one of the expert coaches guiding you through those challenges through those opportunities, sharing their experience and their knowledge. But yeah, so many times that ramp up is just either neglected or just not done right.
Y'all have mentioned that it's good to stay in the development phase as long as possible before race day. And whether our race is a sprint, Olympic, half, or full can impact how long we can stay in the development phase. But talk to me about this. With each athlete being so different, will the timing of how long we can stay in development be impacted by things like our age, our ability, our experience, or is it just more about what race we're preparing for?
It's all of those things. It is dramatically impacted by your age, your experience, your body composition, genetics. All of those things impact the swim, the bike, and the run all differently. People that are older, their bones are starting to get a little softer. The impact, they heal less rapidly. Genetically, the same kind of deal. So you need to ramp that person up slower. Someone else can be very, very durable, been doing the sport for a whole long time. Genetically, have a very low predisposition for injury. And so that looks very, very different for all of those athletes. And so all of those things have a big impact to how long those phases are, when they should, add even the B races and some other races like that. It gets to be very important to optimize those and drop them at the right time. So if you're going to do a half Ironman on the way to a full, don't do it 4 weeks out because that's right in the middle of the height of your big volume. And so that half is not long enough to help you improve. But if you can align that at the time when your long sessions would normally be about the same duration as that race, then it's kind of on the path. It's not slowing you down any. And so that allows you to have a shorter race prep phase and spend more time in development.
Which that's something that somewhat flies in a lot of logic as well, because oftentimes those 70.3s are scheduled on the same race course 3 to 4 weeks out. So it's very, and I think there's even somewhat of a misconception that these athletes need to do that half Ironman 3 to 4 weeks out from the Ironman race. And in reality, as Jeff said, it's probably most likely more often than not, it's going to be counterproductive to not necessarily do the 70.3. There's nothing wrong with that. However, it's that opportunity cost of how are you spending that weekend and the days leading into that weekend.
What else could you have done on that weekend?
Exactly.
You're giving that up. And not just the weekend, but the weekend before it, you're going to taper. So you're likely missing a long ride and a long run before it because you don't want to get injured going into it. And then coming out of it, you need to recover from just doing a half. And so you're going to miss another long run. So it can be a 3-week window when you didn't get to improve. And so your longest ride going into that, the 4th week, the 2 weeks after your half, the longest one you could have done before could have been 4 weeks prior. And so that's a big gap. That's a big injury. I don't know why they're scheduled 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, wherever they are. I don't know if it's more of a logistics thing. The team's already showing up in town, or if there's an advantage that, there can be economic things driving that logistically. But it's definitely better. There are times when people just want to. All my friends are doing this local. I want to do half, but I also want to do, I want to do the full.
And you're talking about the instances like Arizona. The 70.3 Arizona takes place 3-4 weeks before Ironman Arizona.
Right.
Like those kind of instances, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so it depends on why you're doing it, why you're doing the race. I've coached people before. If they really want to do it, they're doing it with friends. It's not a performance issue. They're not doing it to better their performance, but it's social. I want to get the jitters out. I want to, any number of non-performance based reasons to where they might do the swim and the bike and skip the run, or do the swim, bike, and run, and then get back on the bike, and so they're not missing a long bike.
Because they needed more bike that weekend.
Correct. And so they might ride easy for 2 hours immediately after their race. And so there's some ways that you can mitigate some of that opportunity cost around those types of weekends. But
it's also going to be more feasible for your more seasoned athletes as well. Your stronger, more seasoned athletes, those that are doing it and taking on Ironman for the first time, that's incredibly valuable training time. And a 70.3 really just is not the same as Ironman. In fact, it's half. But there's just a massive difference between racing a 70.3 and even training for Ironman. But I think that's generally what I say. Your first time at Ironman, just focus, eyes on the prize. You've got a lot to take in. Don't be distracted by half. Now, your athletes that, again, have more experience, more tenure, more years of training, they can afford a little bit more to have that time.
So something I thought was really interesting, again, building up for my first Ironman Texas, and I'm going to bring up one of our TriDot athletes. He actually made an appearance on the TriDot podcast a few episodes ago. Athlete Paul Wolf from Texas. He did a humble brag where he bragged on himself for making an appearance in Men's Health magazine representing the sport of triathlon. But Paul and I, swim together occasionally, ride together occasionally. We've trained together many times. Great guy. But we're two very different athletes. I'm a little bit younger. He's a little bit older than I am. He's a much stronger cyclist than I am. I'm a much stronger runner than he is. And so it was really interesting to me once we were both hitting that Ironman race prep phase, even just watching kind of our workouts. We have the same schedule, right? So we have the same long
same
run
weekly
days.
pattern.
Same what?
The same weekly pattern.
Yeah, same weekly pattern. So same long run day, same long bike day, same brick workout day. And so you could see on Strava, when I would have a long run and he would have a long run, he would go out and his long run would be an hour and 50 minutes. Mine would be an hour and a half. And then we would get to the weekend and his long bike ride, his stamina bike ride would be 4 hours. Mine would be 4.5. And so you could really see how TriDot was kind of tailoring. This is how long he's going to be on the bike course shorter, so he doesn't need to train that as long as I do because I'm going to be out there longer, and vice versa. And so it was really interesting in real time. Two guys, they're a little bit different in their biology, who are a little bit different in their abilities in the sports, and just seeing how TriDot was customizing it to both of us once we hit that phase was really, really interesting to see.
There's so many amazing things about TriDot, but one thing I kind of want to come back to and re-highlight that we've touched on a little bit is that many coach-written or template training plans are going to prepare an athlete for a race by increasing the volume of each discipline at the same time. Kind of that line in the sand of, hey, this is when we're going to start increasing the duration based on the certain number of weeks that there are until that event date. However, kind of like you were mentioning, Andrew, I'd say that a lot of athletes listening today would say that they have a discipline where they're stronger than another. And with TriDot, your long bike and your long run volume may not necessarily be increasing in duration at, X number of weeks out and the same number of weeks out for each discipline. You may be a really strong runner and preparing in the development phase, you're already knocking out 10 miles for your hour runs. And if you're preparing for the half marathon distance at the end of a 70.3, there isn't much more that you're going to need to do to extend your run stamina. But, that strong runner might be a very new cyclist, and they may need a number of weeks in the race preparation phase to really increase their stamina to ride those 56 miles on the bike.
So let's maybe land the plane here today. The more conversations we have about how to optimize our training, how to do the right training right, how to develop power and stamina, and when in the season to do each. It's kind of given me the mindset where I almost celebrate when I can get back to the development phase, because now I know that's the training that is increasing my thresholds, making me faster, knocking down those PRs on race day. John, Elizabeth, as athletes yourself, what thoughts are going through your head when you get on the other side of a race and get back to the development phase? And we all firsthand experienced this recently. Again, because we all just had our spring races postponed because of COVID-19. And so the day you got that email and found out, oh, I don't have a race in a couple weeks, we all were almost celebrating. Oh, cool. Yeah, it sucks we're not racing, but we can get back to the development phase. We can get back to building those thresholds. And I know Jeff Rains, who's not on the podcast today, I saw him on Facebook telling all of his athletes, like encouraging them, hey, I know it sucks you can't race, but let's rally. Let's work on our speed. Let's work on those thresholds. Let's get even faster. And when that race day comes, you're going to be even more prepared, and you're going to finish even faster. How do you guys, when you see on your plan, when you see on the portal, okay, I'm slipping into developing, Elizabeth, what kind of goes through your head?
Well, like you, Andrew, I have such a great appreciation for the development phase that I didn't have 5 years ago. I absolutely love those long races, and I love the long training sessions. So I used to dread the time on my schedule when I'd be spending more days at the track, doing more interval-based work. But now I get excited about it. I still prefer those longer workouts, but I know that every time I'm in a development phase, I'm getting stronger, I'm getting faster, and that's, going to make me better on the race course.
Great set, everyone. Let's cool down.
Since I already gave away that this episode was recorded during the COVID-19 pandemic, I want to cool down with this today. It's no secret that during this time, some companies are struggling to make ends meet, as folks are visiting retailers less and less and spending fewer dollars with kind of the current uncertain economic climate. Here in the States, folks are doing their best to shop local and support the eateries and businesses that we connect with and enjoy as much as possible. And guys, there are a ton of outstanding companies in the multi-sport space that I'm sure could use some love. So y'all, let's cool down with this. I just kind of want to go around and have each of you share one company whose products are just your go-to. You're a fan, you're a believer, their stuff is your jam, and give them a shout out and encourage somebody maybe to pick up something of theirs to support them during this season. And if someone listens to this episode and it's 2 years from now and we're 2 years removed from this and the world's still a healthy place, okay, these companies are still there. Their stuff's still great. You can check out their brands and their products. But specifically during this time, what's maybe one company you want to give a shout out to? And John, let's start with you.
So for me, it's my local VeloFix. So VeloFix is they're a franchise. They're all over the country. They're mobile bike mechanics. They've got these super cool sprinter vans that are just decked out with. I love tools, and I like kind of fancy myself as like an amateur bike mechanic, so I totally am jealous of the setups these guys have. But the guys in my area in Greater Houston, Austin and Jason, fantastic guys. They came out and supported a camp that we did a couple of weeks ago. They were doing work on bikes. They supported our riders out on the course. So yeah, fantastic guys. It's kind of the evolution of the local bike shop as we're seeing.
They bring the bike shop to you.
Exactly. We're seeing fewer and fewer local bike shops out there, but this is kind of a response to that. So really cool that they're being kind of progressive and forward thinking, and they just deliver a fantastic level of service. They come to your house, they work on your bike, so you don't have any time away. Oftentimes you'd have to drop off your bike, and I remember one time I had a broken spoke, and I dropped off my wheel at the bike shop, and they're like, yeah, we can pick it up in a week. I was like, man, that's a 15-minute job to replace the spoke. Like, yeah, it'll be ready in a week. But I mean, you call it VeloFix or any of these mobile mechanics, they'll come out to the house, and 15 minutes later, you got your wheel back. So yeah, VeloFix is a really cool company that's really providing some great local service.
Yeah, and even with us not having races currently occurring, you need to keep your equipment tuned up. Your bike benefits from some TLC that we all probably don't give it enough of. And so hit up VeloFix, book an appointment with them, and let them take care of your faithful steed. That's a great shout out, John. So Elizabeth, who do you want to kind of plug today?
Well, I know that, any nutrition podcast we talk about, I reference UCAN and how I use that for my training and racing. One of the things that I feel like UCAN has done an incredible job with during this time is still being able to provide nutrition, not only for athletes as they continue to train during this time, but just nutrition for others that use the UCAN products outside of their athletic endeavors as well. There are quite a few people that use that slow releasing carbohydrate just for their personal nutrition and for their health. And so for them to continue, producing those products and continue to find ways to serve their customers during this time. I know that, they've sent out a number of communications saying, we're in this together. We're still here to support you. We're, waiving all shipping fees and really kind of expediting the delivery process to make sure that you still are left with nutrition during this time. Again, just fantastic company, and their response has not been surprising. Just again, continues to deliver for their customers.
Yeah, I mean they were founded on his name was Jonah, right?
Correct.
Just this boy that with a health condition he had, his body needs nutrition every couple hours, and so he relies on UCAN as literally to stay alive, to just continuously fuel his body. And then they figured out there was application for endurance athletes as well, and so it's trickled over. But they've recognized the mission of, hey, there's people that rely on our products day to day, and even though a lot of companies are needing to shut down right now or take some time off, they're still pressing on with that mission. So if you've never tried UCAN before, now's a great time to do so. And if you've already tried their stuff, you're probably already a believer like many of us are, and keep showing them some love, keep using their stuff, because we're still training, and you can look to UCAN Nutrition to fuel your training. So Jeff Booher, what is a company that in this time you want to kind of give a shout out to?
Mine's not a triathlon industry company. I see the same guys that John and Elizabeth are chatting. Definitely kudos to them. But for me, it was just really, I was struck by our local, is a Central Market owned by H-E-B, kind of a regional grocer, and just the things that they did so quickly. I'm sure, across the country, other local stores have done the same thing. They just seem to be the first. They seem to be 2 days ahead of everybody else, and they did some stuff They had a designated person out there sanitizing carts for you, and so you could come up and just go, and they were just constantly wiping down things and doing all that. They up at the front checkout area, we had the social distancing 6 feet. They had a floral department, and they just cleared out the entire floral department, so a whole department was gone.
Wow!
And so they could space everybody out appropriately. And then even at their management, they were not out of things. So they were never out of toilet paper. All the kind of things that were typically out of other places, they weren't there. And I don't know how they did that, what planning, but it was cool. And then even when you get up to checkout at the POS, they didn't require you. They changed their programming not to require some of the validation, so you didn't have to touch it. You could stick your card in, only touching your card, pull it out, and you're done.
And you were good to go.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it was just whatever you could think of, and a couple things you can't, they did it. And so it was really neat. So just to see that commitment.
Doing their part to keep everybody healthy.
Yep. And just the order, the calm. We have, so many other things around us right now that are causing anxiety and worry and headache and inconvenience, and, not to mention the direct misery of those people that are directly affected. But it was just to see that effort was pretty cool.
Yeah, and also a shout out to our law enforcement, because I know a lot of stores like Central Market, your hardware stores, other grocers are having, police and fire departments kind of help crowd control, keep the social distancing in effect, keep everybody calm and orderly, and so shout out to their efforts as well. I know my parents live in Florida, and they have Publix, and my mom was on the phone talking about how well Publix has done some of those similar things that you're talking about. And, it's you don't necessarily think of how much of a hero your local grocery store can be until you're in a time like this, and then you're suddenly appreciative for them really thinking through those measures. So, yeah, that's great. The one company I want to give a shout out to is DeSoto Sport. Emilio and Tracy DeSoto are the founders. It's based in San Diego, California. I swim in their T1 wetsuit. I really like their skin cooler short and long sleeve triathlon tops. Really, really comfortable to run and bike in. They are kind of halting all of their production, and they're taking their skin cooler fabrics that make so many of their products great, and they're making face masks and head covering protection with that fabric. Emilio, he saw a need and knew that he had a manufacturing process that he could fulfill a need, and so they're kind of stepping up in this time and being a local hero. They've donated several cases of washable, reusable DeSoto Sport skin cooler face masks to their local San Diego hospitals. So just right now, if you're looking for just a couple of triathlon products, you want a new jersey, you want a new shirt to run in, you're looking for a wetsuit because we're all swimming in open water right now if we get to swim, maybe go to DeSotoSport.com and check out some of their products. I really like their stuff, and just the way they're stepping up as a company in this time is really, really cool. So I wanted to brag on them and encourage you to check out some of their products. Well, that's it for today, folks. I want to thank coaches Elizabeth James, Jeff Booher, and John Mayfield for talking to us about the most important training block of our season. When you aren't actively building your stamina for that upcoming race, get excited. You have the opportunity to develop those thresholds and get faster for your next race day. Shout out to our friends at Garmin for partnering with us on today's podcast. Head to Garmin.com to see what TriTech might be the next upgrade for you. Enjoying the podcast? Have a question or topic you want to hear us talk about? Go to TriDot.com/podcast and click on Submit Feedback to let us know what you're thinking. We'll do it again soon. Until then, happy training.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure to subscribe and share the TriDot podcast with your triathlon crew. For more great tri content and community, connect with us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Ready to optimize your training? Head to TriDot.com and start your free trial today. TriDot, the obvious and automatic choice for triathlon training.